They say the story of a 98-year-old Yemenite Yid. Now, the Yemenites were renowned for their longevity. They had incredible genes and their lifestyle. This 98-year-old Yemenite Yid comes to a doctor. The doctor asks him, "What's your secret to your longevity? Tell me, what do you do? What do you eat? What's your regimen?" And he says, "I golf every morning and I have a little schnapps." "Come on," the doctor says. "It's got to be your genes." He says, "Well, my father's 120. The doctor says, "No, I don't believe it." He says, "Yeah." The doctor says, "He golfed with you this morning?" He says, "No, this morning he actually got married." The doctor says, "What do you mean he got married? That's ridiculous." He says, he agrees, but his parents were putting pressure. "120 is the amount of years that Rabbi Akiva, the legendary comforter of Klal Yisrael, lived to be 120, and his yahrzeit is actually on Yom Kippur. 135 years after the Common Era, Rabbi Akiva ended his life b'shleimus at 120. And tonight I want to share with you one of the enduring, empowering, and remarkable lessons of Rabbi Akiva that completely trailblazed the entire institution of tshuva. But let's start for a moment from the beginning. We know the Gemara tells us that these days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are referred to in the Psukim as Dirshu Hashem Behimatzai Kra'uhu B'Yaisei Kara. Translated as, seek out God, he will be found, and call out to him as he is near. Now, at face value, these words, this compilation would seem to be redundant, a little bit repetitive. In fact, the entire tshuva process at times seems repetitive. We know Rav Sadia Gaon, it's brought down, he would engage in tshuva every single day. The Rebbe Rashab once told the Frierdiker Rebbe, right after Yom Kippur, he said in Yiddish, "It's der darf man erst tshuva tan." Now we really have to do tshuva. So what is the obsession with the repetitive nature and this ongoing dynamic that tshuva poses in our lives? There's a beautiful medrash I want to share with you. The Medrash Tehillim, Mizmar Pehei, says that the Jewish people approach Hashem and we say, "You tell us to do tshuva, but we are actually going to tell you, you return. Yisroel Aimrim Lach Shuv Ata Batchila." God, in essence, we're saying it's impossible for us to embark on this ambitious and unnatural process for us to rid ourselves from the evil inclination, which would seem to be more powerful than us. You have to come close first. And that's what the pasuk refers to when it says, Shuva Hashem. The Medrash is saying that we're telling God, you have to take the first step. It's not possible for us in our finitude, with our limitations, to take that step. Hashem retorts, Loi, ki ela shuva Yisroel batchila. Hashem flips it around and says, you have to return. What's the pshara? Loi ata tashiv la'atzmecha v'loi anu nashiv la'atzmeinu ela shaninu ke'achad. We'll do it together, as the pasuk says, Shuvenu elokei yishenu. Hashem says this is a process that's going to be collective. It'll be unified. We're both going to take a step forward. You're going to take a step forward, and then I'm going to take a step forward, and then somehow the magic will happen. What's the dialogue? What's really going on here? In a sense, we can understand the Jewish people's claim. The Yetzer Hara that you gave us, the Gemara says, is enough to kill us. How can we contend with an entity that is so powerful and it truly has divine attributes. The Baal Shem Tov says that the reason we say Hashem knew that we sinned, and we don't say I sinned, is because in essence we're telling Hashem, how is it possible for us to stray? It's the Yetzer Hara that you created, that you put in our path to tempt us, to seduce us, to lead us astray. And only because of this divine power that you invested in the Yetzer Hara do we sin again and again. Hashem knew we have sinned. It's not just us. So Hashem says, I want you to take the first step. The Magen Avram says in a very cryptic statement in Siman Tav Kuf Pei Hey that he quotes a story that there was a Baal Tekeah who at one point tried to blow from the shofar in shul, was not able to emit the sound. He took the shofar and in the wide end of the shofar's hole whispered, V'hinayam Hashem Elokeinu u'maseh yedenu kainaneu, and then subsequently, when he blew, the sound came out. And Tolna Rebbe explains, why did he say V'hinayam? Why didn't he say any other psukim which refer to the shofar blowing? V'hinayam is a pasuk in Tehillim, Parak Tzadik. There's psukim in Tehillim, Tiku b'chai de shofar, in Mem Zayin, Pei Dalet, because the pasuk V'hinayam refers to the Jewish people trying to build the Mishkan, in which they did everything that they were able to do, but ultimately it would not stand and it would not be erected, and Hashem had to endow their efforts with a divine, supernatural injection, and only after that did the Mishkan arise. Hashem could have brought down the Mishkan, like Taisus says is going to happen with the third Beis HaMikdash. It's going to come straight down from heaven, Taisus and Masechta Sukkah. But Hashem didn't want that with the Mishkan. He wanted us to take the first step forward, and then He would subsequently bless our efforts. V'hinayam Hashem Elokeinu. So this Yid trying to blow the shofar whispers that pasuk because that's the secret, the magical recipe. When we try to blow and it's not coming out, he says, Hashem, you already told us that you're going to bless our efforts. And after saying that pasuk, the sound came out. There's a beautiful Shem Shmuel. He was quoted once tonight already. The Sachachover Rebbe, the son of the Abnei Nezer, the grandson of the Kotzker Rebbe. And the Shem Shmuel quotes the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah Daf Yud Zayin, which says that when Hashem in the liturgy says Maver Rishon Rishon, He passes the sins over. If you pay close attention to the words, it doesn't say that He eradicates the sin or erases the sin. He passes it over. He puts it on the side in storage, as it were. If we emerge with a clean slate and we don't sin again, and we're not going to be repeat offenders, and it remains in storage. But if we do sin again, and the side of sin on the scale outweighs the sign of merit, then He takes all the sins out from storage and He allows it to pile on top. So the Shem Shmuel says, it's obvious if that's what Hashem does in the negative domain, that He's obviously doing the same with tshuva, with our positive actions. And He tallies every hirhur tshuva, every moment in time that we thought about doing the right thing, that we felt a kernel of remorse and regret, even if it didn't translate into a transformation in our behavioral lifestyle. But that kernel of remorse, that feeling of regret, however fleeting and temporal it may have been, He puts it aside. And He's going to tally it up in our favor. I want to share with you briefly a story that I heard several weeks ago. There was a from yeshiva student who grew up in a very ultra-Orthodox family in Bnei Brak. He rebelled. He left his family and he went to Tel Aviv, to a relative who is secular. But he even outdid his secular relatives, and he, after 4 years of wandering, got engaged to a Gentile woman. His father invites him to come back to Bnei Brak for a Shabbos. He pleasures his father, and he comes back for a Shabbos, even though he tells his father, I'm not changing. I'm not going to break off the engagement, but I'll humor you. Friday night, at the meal, at the Shabbos meal in Bnei Brak, he goes to the porch, He takes out a cigarette, openly violating Shabbos. Father doesn't lose his cool, welcomes him back to the table. After the meal, his father says, I'm going to go to Rav Steinman, Zecher Tzaddik Levracha's tish, his house. He shares some Torah Friday night. Do you care to join me? He says, yeah, I'll join you. They go to Rav Steinman, and after Rav Steinman finishes speaking, the father takes his son to wish Rav Steinman good Shabbos, and then tells Rav Steinman, this is my son who's engaged to a shiksa. Steinman, unfazed, looks at this boy with only love in his eyes. And he says, tell me, how many years is it since you went off the path of Torah mitzvahs? He says, 4 years. He says, in those 4 years, have you ever had a hirhur tshuva? Did you ever feel a kernel of remorse? A fleeting moment of regret? He thinks. He says, yes. There were 5 times that I felt that. How long did they last? He says, between 10 and 20 minutes. Steinman says, wow, I am so jealous of you. Ich bin der Mekana. I never had a feeling of charata. I never had a hirhur tshuva the way you did. Over an hour. He walks away, turns to his father, and he says, I'm breaking off the engagement. Sometime later, the father says, I know why Rav Steinman's words penetrated and inspired you, but what I don't understand is why you agreed to come with me to Rav Steinman's tish, his Friday night table. You were so full of anger. He said, because many, many years ago, before Rav Steinman became the Gadol of Yisroel that he was, he came to test us in school and farher us and test us on the information on our studies. And I didn't learn, I didn't know. And he asked everybody to translate a pasuk. He asked them a question and he gave them a candy. And when he asked me once and I didn't know, he tried coming up with an even simpler, more elementary question so he can give me the candy. I didn't know. He asked me a third question, of the most basic of questions. Even that I didn't know. All the kids left the classroom. He called me behind and he said, Torah is not only judged by knowledge and results, it is also celebrated by the effort that you invest. You tried to answer my questions 3 times, and here's 3 candies for your efforts. That was his memory of Rosh Steinman, and that was why he agreed to go with his father to the tish that Friday night, even though he was so full of rage and anger. Tallying up those moments of hirhur tshuva is what the Shemesh Shmuel says, is what Hashem does. As the counterpart to Mavar Rishon Rishon, Hashem counts and celebrates and views with so much importance every moment of tshuva. Because even one step, Hashem says, I got you. You just have to seek me out, but I'm waiting to be found. Dirshu Hashem bihi matzai. And the Rebbe in a Sikha explains, bihi matzai, he's waiting to be found. The word mitzia, the Gemara explains, refers to somebody who finds $100 bill in their pants pocket. It's completely disproportionate to the effort that you invest. Ein mitzia ba ela behesach hadas. The amount of divine favor that we experience by even seeking him out and taking one step forward is completely disproportionate to the effort that we invest. It's like winning the lottery. You know what happens when you win the lottery? Say the story of somebody who won the lottery once, and the reporters are asking, what are you going to do with all this money? And he says, I'll probably pay my debts off. The reporter says, yeah, but what about the rest? He says, the rest will have to wait. But other people, when they win the lottery, more often than not, they squander it. Because great success sometimes leads to reckless and self-sabotaging behavior. I'll give you a few examples. The Noach syndrome. Noach, after heroically taking his family through the 12 months in the Teva with all the animals in the world, emerges from that experience. He succeeded, the apex of his success. Then he gets drunk and terrible things happen. Somebody achieves the climax of their career. That's where a midlife crisis comes in. People make aliyah. And then sometime later, they feel bereft of the spirituality of Eretz Yisrael. Somebody becomes a Baal Tshuva, and they stop finding the same rich meaning and purpose in Yiddishkeit that they found originally. And that's where the second half of the pasuk comes in. Karu b'hiyosei karev. And we turn to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, whose yahrzeit was on Yom Kippur, taught a magnificent teaching in the end of Masechta Yuma. Masechta Yuma is replete with all the intricate rituals of the day, the tefillas, the hazaz, the karbanas, and then the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed. And Rabbi Akiva, the legendary comforter of Klal Yisrael, says a teaching to placate and comfort Klal Yisrael that they'll be able to retain a level of closeness with Hashem even post-Churban. And he says the famous words, Ma mikva metaras etzmeim, afa kadosh baruch hu metaras Yisrael. Ma mikva metaras etzmeim. Just like the mikvah purifies the impure, so too, tshuva, Hashem says, will purify the Jewish people. That seems very, very elementary. Rabbi Akiva begins the statement with a lot of fanfare. He says, Ashreichem Yisrael, you are so fortunate, you're so lucky. He's about to share with you a pearl of wisdom that nobody knows. And then he proceeds to say something that sounds incredibly elementary. You ever hear somebody quote their wise great-grandfather and say, as my great-grandfather used to say, it is what it is. It's not your great-grandfather. Jackie Mason says that the Jewish husband gets stuck on the car. They pull over him and his wife, and she says, go see what's going on. He goes out to the car, and 5 minutes later, he comes back in, and the wife says, no. With a knowing look, he tells her, I think it's something under the hood. Rabbi Akiva is saying, tshuva is matar. Well, what is he saying? Ma mikva matar es hatmeim. If you had to take one of those words out, it would be the word es hatmeim. Ma mikva matar. Mikva purifies. Obviously, we're dealing with somebody who's tamei. So the Rebbe explains in the Sikha that there is an incredibly profound message here that Rabbi Akiva is referring to. There are various degrees of impurity. For example, if somebody touches a rodent, they only become impure for 24 hours. If somebody touches a corpse, they become impure for 7 days. So what happens if somebody touches a rodent and they touch a corpse? When do they go to mikvah? You would think, wait 7 days. Even though you're tamei for touching the rodent, which lasts only 24 hours, but why should you go to the mikvah if you're anyway impure on account of touching the corpse? But the halacha is not that way. The halacha, in fact, is that you go to the mikvah after 24 hours, even though you will remain impure on account of the greater, more severe impurity, because every degree of impurity that one can remove from themselves is precious, is celebrated, and cherished by Hashem. And that, the Rebbe says, is what Rabbi Akiva is referring to. Ma mikvah metar es hatmeim. Even somebody who's going to remain tamei after they go to the mikvah, that is still someone who has to engage in the process of tshuva, because every step is powerful and necessary and vital. And nobody better than Rabbi Akiva was able to experientially convey that piece of wisdom. Why did Rabbi Akiva decide to become who he was? What inspired him to become a Talmid Chacham? Even though he was a boor, and even though he was an ignoramus at age 40, the drip, drop of water every single day, seeing that something as weak and benign as water, after the consecutive, progressive, constant drip drop, was able to penetrate even something as coarse and as hard as a rock. And he said, obviously, I can be inspired and can be transformed and can be enveloped in the wisdom and the purity and the holiness of the Torah. Ma mikvah mataras etzmeim. Every degree of impurity that one can remove from himself is powerful. And that's the second half of the pasuk, Kara'u b'hiyosei karev. Taking this one step further, it's so easy after Rosh Hashanah to feel so holy and then be hit with a taiva, with a desire, with a temptation, and say it was all for naught. Somebody achieves a powerful time of sobriety and then they relapse. And the natural inclination and thought process is everything I did was a waste of time. It was for naught. Dirshu Hashem behimatzai. You win the lottery. You find God. How could it be that I'm so coarse and I'm so distant even after I found the truth? And it causes us to engage in self-doubt. And that is where Karu b'hiyosei karev comes in. You find truth once, but we spend a lifetime comprehending, probing, and ultimately owning that truth. That's Karu b'hiyosei karev. You call out. It's a conversation. It's an ongoing conversation. For any of you who know the slopes, the difference between skiing and snowboarding. Snowboarding is hard to master, hard to pick up and easy to master, and skiing is easy to pick up and hard to master. That's the process of tshuva. Say the story with the fellow who comes to a bar and he's a nun preaching about the dangers of drinking and how terrible it is and what a vice it is. He goes over to the nun. He says, tell me something. Have you ever had a drink? She says, no. He says, let me buy you a drink. She says, if you must, give me a 40-year Macallan, but put it in a teacup so nobody should know that I'm drinking. He goes to the bartender and he says, can I have some 40-year Macallan in a teacup? The bartender looks at him and he says, don't tell me the nun is here again. Much like the nun, tshuva is an ongoing process. Even when we're still tameh, even though we know that we're going to be plagued with temptation, with desire, with the same struggles, to talk lashon hara, to not come to minyan, to not learn when we're supposed to not show up as the father, as the husband, as the child that we're supposed to. It's an ongoing process, but Hashem wants you to engage in it every step of the way because it's celebrated and it's precious. And I want to conclude with one story. Rabbi Dr. Tursky, was once talking to an alcoholic woman. And in the conversation, she mentioned that she's a passionate fan of the Jets. And she watches every game. And even when she can't watch the game, she has somebody record the game. And she remarked that once, some weeks ago, her friend recorded the game. This is back in the day where you had to record it with a whole device. And when her friend handed her the cassette, she casually, haphazardly remarked, oh, by the way, the Jets won. So Rabbi Tursky looks at her and says, did that ruin the experience for you? She says, on the contrary, it elevated the experience, and that game was a better watch than any other game. He says, what do you mean? He says, well, in the middle of the game, the Jets were down by 20 points. And under regular circumstances, I would have been a nervous wreck, anxious, going to the kitchen for comfort food. But I watched it with serenity. And I was able to maintain my equilibrium because I knew that the Jets were going to win. And so the message of Rabbi Akiva, whose yahrzeit is Yom Kippur, whose message of tshuva is the ultimate comfort even after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, what Yom Kippur could do. Yom Kippur really personifying and embodying his lasting legacy is Ma Mikvah Mataras Etzmeim. Even if we're going to remain Tameh, we're going to have our ups, we're going to have our downs, we're going to have our trials and tribulations. And sometimes it may seem that our team is down by 20 points. We know that Hashem knows that ultimately our team is going to win.